This is World News coming to you live from Algiers. I'm Mariam Zian, and these are the headlines. A new escalation in the Strait of Hormuz. 2 oil tankers were targeted while transiting the waterway. Iran says it has shot down a U.S. drone near the strategic passage, while Washington maintains that the war is now focused on the Strait of Hormuz in preventing Tehran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Coming up, settler attacks are expanding across the West Bank. The Palestinian presidency has condemned the occupation's practices, while Hamas warns that transferring settlers' powers to the Zionist police paves the way for the annexation of the West Bank. Fears are mounting over a renewed wave of mass crossings from Morocco into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta. And security forces have been placed on high alert while Spanish media accuse Rabat of exploiting foreign issues to divert attention from its domestic crises. Welcome to the details. First, in our news, the United Arab Emirates has announced that 2 of its vessels were targeted in the Strait of Hormuz. The UAE state news agency, citing the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, reported that 2 company-operated vessels came under attack while transiting the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday evening. ADNOC said the incident caused no injuries and that the situation was brought under control, according to their statement. And Iran said on Friday it had shot down a U.S.-made MQ-9 Reaper drone after it allegedly violated Iranian airspace over the Hormuz province near the Strait of Hormuz. The IRGC said its air defense units detected and engaged the drone during a surveillance operation, causing it to crash. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reported that the United States lost 45 MQ-9 Reaper drones during the war against Iran, about a quarter of its fleet of the aircraft. And Chairman of Iran's National Security Committee, Ibrahim Azizi, said what he described as a failure of strategies based on surrender, division and sabotage against the Iranian people. The armed forces and control of the Strait of Hormuz leaves the United States with no option but to speed up its withdrawal from the region. Speaking ahead of Friday prayers in the city of Shiraz, Azizi stressed that Washington, in his words, has no choice but to submit to the will of the Iranian people, calling for a swift and unconditional withdrawal from the region. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said on Thursday that Washington's primary objective in the war against Iran is to keep oil and gasoline prices low for Americans, with preventing Tehran from acquiring a nuclear weapon ranking second. Speaking in an interview with Fox News, Vance noted that oil prices have fallen from the elevated levels recorded in the early days of the conflict.
Really is twofold. It's ensuring that the Gulf countries continue to send oil and gas to the world economy so that we have energy price stability. That's obviously important for the American people. I know that oil is down today, and it's way down from the highs in the early days of the conflict. That's goal number 1. Keep oil and gas cheap for Americans all over our country.
J.D. Vance also stressed that the war is now centered on the control of the Strait of Hormuz and on preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Let's have a listen.
And then obviously goal number 2 is ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. I feel confident we're accomplishing both of those goals, but it's inherently an unpredictable thing because the Iranians themselves are unpredictable and they sometimes don't honor the commitments they've made to us.
The United States has threatened to continue its naval blockade of Iran indefinitely and to intensify economic pressure on Tehran amid stalled ceasefire negotiations, despite declining global oil supplies and rising regional tensions. Speaking to reporters during a visit to Panama on Thursday, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the U.S. military is capable of maintaining a naval presence in the region to sustain the blockade on Iran, which he said has inflicted significant economic damage on the country. The United States has threatened Iran with unprecedented measures aimed at inflicting further financial damage on the country. In an interview with Rob Schmidt tonight on Newsmax on Thursday, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Washington would impose measures on Iran unlike anything previously seen in the history of economic isolation imposed on any country.
Watch this space for more announcements coming next week, because we are going to apply measures like have never been seen in the history of economic isolation on a country.
The Strait of Hormuz is emerging as a key flashpoint in the escalating U.S.-Iran confrontation. Shipping traffic through the strategic waterway has dropped sharply as tensions over control and freedom of navigation intensify, with Washington threatening sustained pressure and Tehran asserting its authority over the strait. The dispute is no longer just about maritime trade, but about who controls one of the world's most strategic shipping lanes. Nabil Khazini has a report.
This is one of the world's most critical energy routes, a narrow stretch of water, a vast strategic prize. But now, it has become a front line and a struggle over something more fundamental. Who decides who gets through? The numbers tell the story. On Thursday, just 9 commodity vessels were recorded crossing the strait. The daily August average is 12. Before the conflict, it was around 130 to 140. Ships are not simply being delayed. Many are staying away, and behind that paralysis is a battle over control. Iran says the strait is under its control. Tehran has made clear that it will not restore normal passage unless Washington accepts its conditions. Washington is answering with pressure of its own. The United States sustain its naval blockade of Iran indefinitely. The message is clear. Neither side appears ready to give away. Just days ago, there was a possible way out. Iran and Oman were reported to be close to an arrangement for reopening the waterway. Washington expected a deal, but that opening has not materialized. Instead, the gap between the two sides has widened, and the consequences are spreading. Oil prices remain elevated. Asian refiners are looking for alternative supplies. Shipping companies are weighing the risk of entering the Gulf against the cost of waiting outside it. For decades, Hormuz was a passageway. Now it is a bargaining chip, a choke point, and a measure of power. The question is no longer simply whether ships can cross these waters. It is who decides when they can cross and whose rules they must follow.
In the same context, Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Ghulam Hossein Dehghani, rejected U.S. accusations made during a Security Council meeting on Yemen, calling them fabricated and unsupported by credible evidence. In a letter to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the Security Council, he said the allegations were an attempt by Washington to mislead the Council and deflect attention from its own destabilizing actions in Yemen and in the region.
Yemen today faces a more serious risk of return to large-scale conflict than at any point since the 2022 UN-mediated truce. There has been an intensification of military activity along front lines, with recent attacks by Ansar Allah in Marib, Hadramaut, Mocha, and beyond, causing casualties among both military personnel and civilians.
In occupied Palestine, Zionist settlers attacked Palestinian homes with stones and live ammunition in the Al-Buwaira area, east of Al-Khalil in the occupied West Bank. According to the Palestinian news agency citing local security sources, on Friday, settlers attacked Palestinian homes with stones and opened live fire at them overnight in the Al Buwaira area east of Al Khalil. Zionist occupation forces later stormed the area, raided the homes, and detained dozens of residents for several hours, including elderly people and patients, subjecting them to mistreatment. The Palestinian presidency has condemned the escalating attacks by Zionist occupation forces and settlers in the West Bank, particularly the recent assaults in the town of Qusra near Nablus. Presidential spokesperson Nabil Abu Rudaina said the attacks constitute war crimes under international law and are aimed at imposing a fait accompli and forcibly displacing Palestinians from their land. Zionist occupation forces and settlers are intensifying pressure on Palestinian communities across the occupied West Bank, restricting access to basic services, seizing water resources, and forcing families from their homes. Yasin Erekti has more.
Zionist crimes in the occupied West Bank are taking increasingly severe forms. Beyond demolishing homes and razing Palestinian land, new measures are being used to restrict daily life and push communities towards displacement. In Qusra, south of Nablus, Palestinian families are facing a tightening siege. Zionist settlers, under the protection of occupation forces, have got access to electricity, water and basic supplies. Forces of the Zionist entity have also reinforced their military presence and forcibly evicted numerous families from their homes, seeking to seize the properties and turn them into military outposts. In the Fasail region of the Jordan Valley, Zionist settlers have targeted another vital resource, water. They forcibly seized control of a major water source and cut supplies to Palestinian farmers, leaving agricultural land without sufficient irrigation and causing crops to dry up and fail. The United Nations Human Rights Office has documented these ongoing Zionist violations, reporting that practices by the Zionist occupation authorities and settlers contribute to the forced displacement and coercion of Palestinian families from their homes and lands. The developments come despite international legal rulings concerning the occupied Palestinian territory. The International Court of Justice has reaffirmed the illegality of Israeli settlements and called for an end to the occupation. From the siege of towns to the seizure of water sources, the Zionist occupation is imposing mounting pressure on Palestinians across the West Bank, leaving communities facing a stark choice: displacement or life under continued Zionist suffocation.
And Hamas has warned against the decision by the Israeli occupation's Minister of War to transfer executive powers related to settlers in the occupied West Bank from the military to the Israeli police, describing the move as a step toward de facto annexation and the consolidation of Israeli control over occupied Palestinian territory. In a statement issued on Friday, Hamas said the decision, which places these powers under the authority of the police controlled by far-right Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, would further expand settlement activity and provide greater protection for settler attacks against Palestinians, their property, and their holy sites.
The decision by the criminal Israeli Minister of War to transfer executive powers related to settlers in the occupied West Bank from the army to the Israeli police represents a dangerous step towards imposing a de facto annexation and consolidating control over the occupied Palestinian territories by imposing Israeli laws in flagrant violation of international law that criminalizes settlement activity.
Pro-Palestinian protesters gathered Friday at Greece's port of Piraeus near Athens to demonstrate against the arrival of a Zionist cruise ship, waving Palestinian flags and denouncing the war on Gaza. The protest comes amid growing demonstrations across Greece, with trade unions, political groups, and civil society organizations urging the government to end all forms of confrontation with the Zionist entity.
The purpose of today's protest is to reaffirm loudly and clearly our solidarity with the Palestinian people and to condemn genocide and ethnic cleansing that Israel has been perpetrating for over 2 years in Gaza and the West Bank, considering that for over a year, wherever this Israeli cruise ship has docked, protests have been heard and massive demonstrations have been held to prevent it from docking. The carrying of weapons is unwelcome in our country and by our people.
OCHA has warned that recent airstrikes on densely populated areas of Gaza are causing further harm to civilians. The UN agency reported at least 3 strikes, including one near Al Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis, and said it continues to provide aid to around 60,000 families and roughly 700,000 meals a day across the enclave. In Lebanon, the government has called on the Zionist entity to end its destruction operations, halt expansion of buffer zones, and set a clear timetable for withdrawing occupation forces from Lebanese territory. The demand was raised during talks between Prime Minister Nawaf Salam and U.S. General Joseph Clearfield, who discussed the negotiating framework and the latest developments in southern Lebanon. In different news, Spanish media reports suggest that Morocco is using foreign policy issues to divert attention from domestic social and economic challenges, including poverty and declining investment in education and healthcare. El Independiente said the move aims to shift attention away from the recent Syria migration crisis, while Atalaya warned that worsening living conditions, widening inequality, and limited opportunities for young people are fueling migration pressures. And the Washington Post reported, citing Moroccan migrants, that Moroccan authorities facilitated the movement of thousands of migrants toward the Spanish city of Ceuta in late July. The newspaper said migrants claimed security forces allowed them to pass and directed some toward the sea, adding that Spanish authorities are investigating Morocco's role in the crisis. And in the Sudanese file, Sudanese media reported that the army and allied forces repelled an RSF attack on Jabal Hishaba and Arda, southwest of El Ubaid in North Kordofan state. According to Andalu agency, the attacking forces were pushed back with casualties and equipment losses amid escalating fighting across the Kordofan region. The Sudanese army has announced that its forces carried out what it described as well-executed operations and liberated areas it considers strategically important on Darfur and Kordofan fronts. Speaking to All 24 News on Friday, Mutawakkil Wakil Abuja, spokesperson for the Joint Force of Armed Struggle Movements allied with the Sudanese army, said the armed forces supporting units and popular resistance groups engaged in fierce battles against the rapid support forces.
First, on the Jabrut-Sheikh-Bara axis, our forces courageously repelled a large-scale attack launched by the militia across 3 axes. By the grace of God and the steadfastness of the fighters, the assault was broken, the attacking force was scattered, and they were forced to flee after suffering heavy losses in equipment and hundreds of dead. Second, on the North Darfur axis, our forces executed a well-coordinated offensive operation that culminated in the liberation of the Umbaro area and its neighboring regions, completely clearing them of the rebellion following fierce battles during which the militia suffered substantial losses in lives and equipment, with its elements fleeing the battlefield and leaving behind their dead and vehicles.
And Chairman of Sudan's Transitional Sovereignty Council Abdel Fattah al-Burhan resumed his official duties from the Republican Palace in Khartoum on Thursday, more than 3 years after leaving the seat of government following the outbreak of the conflict. The Transitional Sovereignty Council released a video showing al-Burhan arriving at the Republican Palace to receive the credentials of several newly appointed ambassadors, including those of Somalia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Saudi Arabia. The International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC mission in Sudan has warned that the impact of the conflict on basic services has been catastrophic across the country, particularly in areas directly affected by the fighting. In remarks to All 24 News on Friday, Farid Al-Hamid, spokesperson for the ICRC mission in Sudan, said daily life has become extremely difficult for countless Sudanese families, many of whom lack the most basic necessities, including security, healthcare, food, and clean water.
باتت الحياة اليومية في جميع أنحاء البلاد في غاية الصعوبة بالنسبة
Daily life across the country has become extremely difficult for countless Sudanese families, as millions of people lack even the most basic necessities of life, including healthcare, food, and clean and safe drinking water. Unfortunately, the impact of the conflict on essential services has been catastrophic in every sense of the word. We're talking about mothers giving birth without even the most basic medical care, and patients losing access to treatment.
The ICRC spokesperson also warned that food security conditions are deteriorating sharply across Sudan, creating unprecedented levels of suffering.
يدخل النزاع المسلح في السودان عامه الرابع.
The armed conflict in Sudan is entering its fourth year and continues to take a devastating toll on civilians, causing what various reports describe as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Unfortunately, the situation is deteriorating significantly across the country, leaving behind unprecedented suffering. An estimated 33 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, representing more than two-thirds of Sudan's population. As for food security, the crisis is worsening considerably. Around 70% of the population depends on agriculture and livestock as a primary source of income and food. However, the outbreak of hostilities has disrupted access to farmland and forced farmers to miss entire agricultural seasons, leaving many families facing severe food shortages and the loss of their livelihoods.
Moving on to the Russian-Ukrainian file, Russia's Ministry of Defense has announced that its forces have taken control of 2 additional settlements in the Donetsk region following offensive operations. In a statement issued on Friday, the ministry said the settlements were Toretskoye and Novonikolayevka in Donetsk. It added that units of Russia's center group of forces had improved their tactical positions and inflicted losses of more than 2,435 Ukrainian troops. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow believes the United States is heavily involved in Ukrainian attacks against Russia and that the issue has been raised with Washington. Speaking to state television on Friday, Lavrov said U.S. support for Ukraine reportedly includes the provision of intelligence information.
We have submitted a series of questions to the U.S. State Department requesting comment, including on the intelligence reports and the fact that the United States is heavily involved, including in planning and executing strikes against civilian targets deep inside Russian territory, and we are awaiting a response. We will make our methods even more stringent to dismantle everything that fuels the war machine in Kyiv from the West, and we are doing so.
A source familiar with the matter told Reuters on Thursday that Ukraine has submitted a proposal to Russia to hold attacks on civilian targets in the Black Sea, following growing strikes on ships and port infrastructure that have raised concerns over global food supplies. The source said Kyiv conveyed the proposal through a third party and is still awaiting a response. The Kremlin and Russia's foreign ministry did not immediately comment on the reported Ukrainian offer. And on Friday, Russia rejected the idea of a ceasefire with Ukraine in the Black Sea, commenting on Turkey's call for guarantees to ensure the security of navigation in the Black Sea. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow sees no justification for what he described as health measures that would only provide the Kiev government with temporary breathing space. Speaking to Vesti News program, Lavrov also maintained that Russia was not the party that initiated attacks on ships and maritime infrastructure in the region.
We still significantly intensify our efforts to dismantle everything that fuels the war machine in Kyiv from the west, and we're already doing so. They're already starting to complain. It is no coincidence that more and more voices from different parts of our common space are calling for an immediate ceasefire. This will not work. We should only stop after reaching a long-term, reliable and sustainable settlement. If we stop now, along the entire communication line, we will essentially allow the erasure of the achievement of our ancestors and great-grandparents who defeated Nazism. This is something that cannot even be contemplated.
And finally, forest fires in England and Wales have reached unprecedented levels as a fifth summer heat wave fuels more frequent and intense blazes. Fire officials said this year's wildfire total has already exceeded last year's 1,017 incidents, warning the season could last until November and set new records. And that's a wrap for tonight's edition. From me and the rest of the team, thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.